to Energy Vista, a podcast on energy issues, personal and professional trajectories. I'm your host, Leslie Palti-Guzman. It's May 8th, 2025, and time for a new Energy Vista episode. Today I'm exchanging with David Abraham, a faculty member at Boise State University. David is the author of The Elements of Power, published by Yale University Press in 2015, and was very prescient and had a lot of foresight to see everything's coming up right now with the metal mining, rare earth discussions, and how rare metal are shaping global power. So that was 10 years ago. Hi, David.
Hi, Leslie. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and congratulations for, pretty much anticipating and predicting way ahead of mainstream today's discussion around minerals. I wanted, before to dive into today's discussion, where we're going to talk about all the front page news around rare minerals, that we should probably have paid attention 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But I wanted to acknowledge today's date. It's May 8th. It's the 80th anniversary of Victory Day, the victory of the Allied forces, marking the end of World War II, and the capitulation of Nazi Germany and the rest of the Axis. And, it's a good reminder that without key minerals like iron, tungsten, manganese, zinc, the Allied forces wouldn't have been able to fuel their war efforts. And these materials are still the backbone of our military, like for tanks, ammunition, and other essentials, war materials. Do you have any, take on this, like for the next war? Are we ready? I kind of know where you you fit in, because I just saw your op-ed that from a few days ago, that how the United States lost the Earth material war to China. But without going to big picture, like how are we doing right now for war military preparation?
Well, I think if you look at the past, you highlighted one side, which was the U.S. and having access to resources. But I think if you look at the other side, in Germany and Japan and their inability to get resources, the fact that that iron ore was roughly 3 times the cost in Germany than it was at the rest of the world, because it only had its own resources, became a challenge for Germany. When the U.S. cut off resources to Japan, it sparked a serious backlash. The question is, do we have the resources we need for a conflict or just the overall economy without trade? The answer is no. But that's true for all countries. That's true for the UK. That's true for Japan. That's true for Germany. I mean, China.
Yeah.
So it's a question of what does our society rely upon, and the materials that are in front of us every day. They're half the elements known to man in front of this computer screen that's in front of you and I.
Yeah, the cell phone, the
Right,
screen, everything.
right. So while there is definitely a challenge in terms of, hey, do we have the resources for the magnets or the semiconductors or batteries? The answer is no. But there's not a country that feels they're always secure the whole way through.
Right.
There's always concern. I think if we're talking about China, they're concerned. They have enough resources that they need: oil and gas, copper, a whole slew of rare metals. So the answer is no. The U.S. doesn't have what it needs. But I think overall, this mutual dependency on resources creates an opportunity for stability as well as instability.
So you've been raising the alarm now for a while, and I have your book in front of me.
Thank you.
And that is terrific, by the way. I recommend to everybody. And you have an updated version, I think, coming up soon, 10 years after. So you warned about our dependence You warned about China's dominance in rare earth and critical minerals, and you wrote a book about it. I'm sure you did a tour and you spoke at different think tanks and universities. Did you feel at the time that you were listened to, that, or you were just like Cassandra, right? You called it like the war over the periodic table way back, and it's happening right now. And so, how did you feel at the time, and how do you feel now?
Well, the working title for the book was War Over the Periodic Table.
Which is an
That's what the
amazing
book was
title.
supposed to be. So I couldn't get it. I couldn't get approval for that title. Um, Yale at the time was the press and said, no, we don't think that's the right title. War is a bit much. So if you look at the first chapter
Yeah,
is called War Over the Periodic Table. So there was a sense, hey, this is an issue, but how serious is it? And it never, at least in the U.S., rose to the level of hey, this is something we need to take very seriously. In Japan, there was a sense of, well, we rely on materials to make the high tech goods that we have, so we have to be concerned about our supply lines. There was a little bit more sense in Germany as well, and obviously there was a sense in China. But the reason why those countries were concerned about materials, because those were the countries that really relied upon the critical minerals for inputs into your products.
right.
And so they understood their importance, where a country like the U.S. doesn't rely upon them very
Yeah.
much for the production, because it doesn't have the industrial capacity that those three countries have.
Mm. And
So at that time,
yeah, you reminded us also in the book that Japan got kind of a red flag when China decided to cut also some of the exports of some of those minerals to Japan back in 2010. So that
yeah,
this has probably also accelerated Japan's strategy around minerals.
yeah, they were very concerned, and then they took a two-pronged approach at that time. So in 2010, China had cut off the access of rare earths, a subset of critical minerals, or a subset of rare metals that are really important for magnets. And magnets are really crucial for motors and high efficiency motors. And so when that happened, Japan did two things. One, it started to search for other sources, whether that's
Mm.
recycling, whether that's mining, and then secondly, which may seem counterintuitive at the moment, more Japanese companies went over to China to build facilities, because the companies wanted access to resources.
Right.
And so if you couldn't bring it to your shores, you could produce within China. And
Yeah.
so you saw that happening as a response. So for the Japanese companies, they had access to resources in that way. That seems
Yeah.
to be something that's not going to be happening at this time.
Mm. So since the beginning of 2025, a new administration, a new president, it seems that it has become front and center with different executive orders. Why was it so slow? Or do you feel like it's more pressing as an issue right now? Um, and, do we have finally in the US a national strategy and cross agency effort to put together a real, whether it's bringing back domestically some production and mining, or venturing abroad and partnering with capable partners? Like, do you feel like everything is coming finally together, or it's going to be a very, very long process?
Well, it's a process where this administration has really said, we're concerned about resources.
Yeah.
And so it's really raised the flag, and it seems to be a guiding mantra within the administration. So whether it's conversations in Saudi Arabia that'll be forthcoming, or whether it's conversations it's having with Ukraine, it drives conversations.
Yeah.
People understand that we have to somehow get access to resources. Uh, but I don't. It's in the process of becoming holistic.
Yeah.
So what you have is the focus on getting things out of the ground, and that's a very important thing. And now there's increasing focus being put on processing the minerals, turning it into a usable form. But if we don't have an entire supply chain, then we're still stuck. So what you need is the focus on the entire supply chain. So what some things in the last administration was really focused on was green technologies. And so when you have green technologies, all of a sudden you have demand for these resources. So by focusing on the supply, that alone won't be sufficient. We have to start focusing on demand, because that's, in my opinion, what really sparks sustainable supplies, is if they know where they are going, rather than, because if you reflect on the Soviet economies, there was a lot of focus on producing supplies, and people
Right.
didn't always know where those materials or where those
Right.
products were going. But
Yeah.
really, what sustains economies is the demand,
Yeah.
and so
You
I
have a
think there's
really
got to
good,
be more focus there.
yeah, you have a really good line in your book that, for the, let's say for the iPhone, or any tech that we're using right now, the engineers working on them were thinking about what is the best mineral for the purpose of the tech, but not necessarily which one is the more abundant, or which one is the easier to access, right?
Right,
do you,
right.
do you think there should be also a coordination with all those clean tech company, clean energy, or tech company, military, like to have this kind of holistic approach, as you were mentioning, where it's the mineral has a purpose, technically speaking, but we also need to consider how easy or not is it to access it, to mine it at home, abroad, right?
Right.
And how expensive, I guess, it is, or not.
I, I think it's an increasingly important point. What we've used to have is that companies were very aware of the cost of a
Right.
particular component or mineral, and therefore, if they knew the cost was high or going to be high, they might substitute around that. And so that's kind of economics.
Yeah.
But you add in a layer of material uncertainty, and that does affect price, but not as clearly. And I think what you've seen over the past few years, but there are times where it's happened in the past, is that people said, "Well, I don't want to deal with X material or Y material," so they tried to engineer around it, and that creates an opportunity for you to have very strong or more stable supply lines and be able to produce something, but it also puts you at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah.
If you cannot use X or Y material that produces a better product, then you're going to have to figure out how to make your product more efficient or faster or stronger to compete against companies or countries that have access to those resources.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's break down like the two-track approach. And the first track is basically being able to partners with allies, right? Or
Mhm.
countries that have those resources. And so they already have mining, or they already have refining capabilities. Which one are new? Like you mentioned Saudi Arabia, I think now it's front and center also for Saudi Arabia as a new strategy to remain relevant beyond fossil fuels. And they are trying to position themselves in the supply chain. We heard a lot about the Ukraine US mining deal. We heard also a lot about Greenland, and more recently about seabed mineral resources and going offshore. So
Mm.
that's a lot. But do you think like we need to basically strike everywhere to see what's, panning out in terms of results, and see, at the end of the day, I mean, diversifying basically the strategy and going into multiple places?
Well, diversifying is always a strong strategy whenever you're talking about resources. Um, but the ability, we have a little bit limited ability to function on our own. We don't have a strong mining uh, economy.
Mm.
A lot of the better companies are either in China, or they're in Canada, or they're in Australia. We don't have the capacity to set up mines in a lot of those jurisdictions. even if they are the right place to be. So there are a number of things that we're going to have to do. Partnering, like you say, with countries is one thing that's really critical. Ensuring that supply lines can go to where they're needed. For example, of rare earths. Do we need the facilities within our own borders, or would they be fine in Canada? Would they be fine in partnering countries? It would be hard pressed for me to say that. Well, if Canada has a robust supply line, then the U.S. is short because it doesn't have it within its own borders. I think that would be a little bit short sighted. This is history says, and you use World War II as an example. If you have access to resources through partners, it can be just as efficient as having access to resources, or more efficient than having access to resources within your own borders. And so I just generally feel that working with allies is helpful, but each ally is different. So Saudi Arabia, they're mapping their country and hoping that they're going to strike oil twice. I don't think Saudi Arabia will be the Saudi Arabia of rare earths or the Saudi Arabia of lithium. I think they've done well with oil, with oil and gas, and so I think that gives them leverage to invest elsewhere. So what's more fascinating to me is, where does the capital go?
Right.
Does it go to projects in Brazil? Does it go to projects in where do the financial resources go? And then in a country like Greenland or Brazil or South Africa, then we're really talking about the minerals themselves, and
Right.
we're not partnering with them for access to capital. We should be figuring out how capital can go there to support the resources that we think the world needs.
Okay. Do you see the US companies going in the same place as where China is going? And is it problematic over the medium term, long term? Should, like, China has its own suppliers and the US its own suppliers, or we can both have the same supplier?
I think if we're going for different resources, then we're kind of misguided, because we should really be going where the geology is,
Right.
and where the best resources are able to be gotten. And there'll be places where we compete. There'll be places where they have a leg up. There'll be places where we have a leg up. But right now, they do have more of a leg up, because the difference is, when they come in, they can come in with capital, and then they can come in with knowledge, and they can come in with the ability to extract the resources and do it at a large scale and do it quickly and efficiently. We cannot. And that's the kind of capacity that we're going to have to work on internally, and we'll have to work on with other countries. And we'll also have to figure out how to work on that with China in some way.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned that, I think, in your last op-ed, that maybe the solution is not to imitate and replicate what China is doing, but come up with our own way of doing. And a big advantage and an edge that the US has always had is to put money and efforts into new technologies, right? Do you see, like, um, some hope, in a way, in finding new technologies that could accelerate the mining process or the refining process and give an edge to the US?
That is where the opportunity is to find a way to make resources that were once not profitable to extract profitable, because of a new way to target the resources, a new way to refine the resources. That's a critical function, and there are breakthroughs to be had. The challenge that you have, however, is that mining projects are very, very, very expensive, and they're less willing to invest in unproven technologies because of the projects that are so expensive. So on one hand, we do have to innovate, and we have to innovate quickly. At the other hand, we are going to have to figure out how to use existing technologies to produce some of the material now at costs that would be competitive globally. That last part is going to be very, very hard.
Yeah.
I don't believe that with the cost of capital and with the ability that China has, that we'll be able to catch up to the ability to produce materials as efficiently as they can.
Yeah. So I
So I
think
think
that's a
that's
key point.
a
Yeah.
given.
Yeah, I think that's a key point and so important in so many strategic sectors where financing is the bottleneck, basically. And for the second track, if the US wants to bring back at home mining and processing and onshoring again the supply, some part of the supply chain at least, solving this financing issue is going to be critical.
Hmm.
Um, Many people start to speak about a sovereign wealth fund or having more like state sponsored money being invested in some of those key technologies or projects. Do you see a role here? And do you think it will enable the competition with China to be more successful?
Well, we're cutting a lot of foreign aid. We're cutting a lot of other types of assistance within our budget. So that does free up capital. We'll do things in a little bit of a different way. We will have to figure out how to marshal resources as an economy, not necessarily completely as a government, but as an economy to do that. And so I think there are probably thoughts. I can't speak to any specific thing, but I think there are people within the government who are thinking about how to marshal these resources, and they would be there. Is that the best way to compete against China? Again, we're marshaling resources, but who do we have on the other end who can spend it and help develop the project? And that's where we'll need international partners for that, just because we don't have the manpower to be able to develop. Develop.
I think for the Ukraine mineral deal, the DFC is involved, and I guess the Exim Bank could be involved in other projects. Or I mean, there are already existing agencies that could maybe already help, right? Existing
Well,
ones.
there are the thing is that if they were that promising of a resource already in 2015, they would have been gone after then. Now you're coming into a country that's been in war and hopefully it will get out of war at some point, but then it's still in an unstable area. So who are you going to convince to come in with X amount of resources to develop that? Plus, it's not clear they have a lot of the resources that are the most important for us.
Right. So if
Countries
we
like
can
South
stop,
Africa. Yep.
yeah, if we can stop just a little bit on here because I have the map in front of me. I was checking, what does Ukraine mineral deposit map look like? So there is a little bit of titanium, uranium, lithium, manganese, graphite, and
Mm-hmm.
others. I guess those are potential underground resources, right? Like until you really explore it.
They'll probably
And
remain underground. Most of them will probably remain underground.
so, can you
Um,
elaborate a little bit on that?
uh, sure, it's there are resources everywhere, and the questions is are they economic to get out? And for the foreseeable future, as I see it, there aren't going to be $1 billion investments going into Ukraine for the development of mining resources that would be at any scale that would put Ukraine at the forefront of global mining. And I think we're better at looking at places that have traditionally more resources, whether they be Brazil or South Africa or Indonesia or Congo. And I'm not saying DRC is a easy place to invest in. It's complex in a different way than Ukraine is. But I think there are more opportunities elsewhere than Ukraine. I think what the mineral deal signals to people is that the U.S. does have an interest in developing the resources that are there. But does it give anyone any specific incentive to go in? No.
And it gives potentially Ukraine some kind of indirect security guarantees.
Yeah, well, that I'm not going to wade too much into what does it do for the war effort, or how does that align Ukraine and Russia? I mean, Ukraine and the U.S. vis-a-vis Russia.
Yeah.
I'll stay out of that. But in terms of actually developing minerals, it's a political flag that hey, if someone's interested in developing resources, I think the U.S. would be very supportive.
Yeah. So coming back to the financing, I was not even aware, but I saw a headline this week that the CIA has a venture capital arm, and they just invested in Alta Resources Technologies that apparently has a new technology to mine with protein. So I'm not an engineer, I don't even know what it means, but it seems to be a revolutionary way to mine. And we were talking earlier about new technology, so it's kind of a combination of a state-sponsored agency putting money into a new startups technology. So
But
do you see those kind of partnership promising?
well, you have DoD that's interested,
Yeah,
Department of Defense, the Department of Commerce. There's a whole bunch of Department of Energy has been putting money in coal ash and what resources are there. Um, most of those will fail, um, but that's okay because that's what we expect, and that's why they're either venture funds or they're sponsored research. The government's role is to be able to um, enable capital through itself or through others to find um, new opportunities that might not get invested in, whether that's health or resources. So I think it's really important that the U.S. Continues to do that type of activity, but they have to realize that it's a lot of it will fail. It would be helpful if the U.S. government has more knowledge capacity within the government. I think the Department of Defense has some real smart people working for it. Department of certain pockets of the Department of Energy, but we as a country don't have a large wealth of knowledge in mining, and so a lot of the investments that we're making tend to be the people who are loudest in the room, and that's a
yes,
that's a bit of a challenge because
yeah,
the people who are the seabed mining folks, are they the best people to determine which resources get stockpiled or not? I would probably argue no. You'd want to have an expert who looks at which resources should be stockpiled. But right now, it seems like, hey, they're getting an ear.
right. How do you not pick winners that are that have the best lobbyists in the White House, basically?
Or
Yeah,
in Congress, or
or
in
in
Congress.
Congress.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you have people who are just, and so that's where Japan has a little bit of a leg up because there is more. I used to work in the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry there, and they don't drive the industry, but they work closely with them to understand some of the challenges and opportunities, and so it's easier for them to push certain technologies or understand what may work and what doesn't. Where our relationship between business and government has not traditionally been that. And so
yeah.
it just puts us at a disadvantage to make large decisions quickly. So we kind of outsource that to the lobbyists.
Hmm. Another reason maybe to have the government more involved in those financing of strategic mineral projects is, as you mentioned in your book, like the mining projects are long term. Sometimes they run into delays. There are cost overrun. By the way, I see a lot of parallel with an industry that I'm much more familiar, which is the LNG industry. Right? It's like billions of dollars that you have to inject. You don't even know if you'll reach final investment decision, and then the market can switch around. But like the mining you were mentioning, like the we need investors that are here for the long run, right? And see also the strategic, because the commercial impact of the project may not always be relevant, right, at all time,
Mm.
but the strategic component is here. So there is kind of a dichotomy here where the US is really relying on the private sector, but the private sector likes quick returns on their investments. But this is a long supply chain. It takes a long of time, a long time, lead time to get it off the ground. And so you need investors that are here for the long term. So how do you
And
make this happen?
well, I also think, Leslie, you highlight something an important parallel. So an LNG project, what do they range between? What, 2 and 10 billion?
Oh yeah, like the
Yeah.
recent ones. I mean, Mozambique is like 40 billion. The
Okay.
latest one in the US is like more closer to 20 billion.
Okay. So the mining projects aren't that dear, but if you're looking at a couple billion, the difference is that once you get LNG, once you get natural gas up, there's a market for it. Like there's going to be demand. Yeah, there's price and it's volatile, but that the supply, that there's a market for it. These minerals, you don't have it because they're highly volatile and because it's not a liquid market. That investing that amount of capital is just increasingly risky. A new technology could come along and then wipe out the demand. Now, historically, on average, demand continues to rise. Even we might wipe out one demand continues to rise. But investors aren't thinking like that, and so the real challenge is the stable long term, and is there a market for once the resources come out, and that's always been the real challenge. In China, they said, well, we're going to demand the resources anyway, so we know we're going to need them. The cost might be X, Y, or Z, but we know we're going to need them. But in the U.S., we're producing the resources again. Going back to the beginning of the point, we want to produce resources for an uncertain demand,
Yeah.
and it's not even within our shores.
So give me one mineral that is being used in the cell phone, in the iPhone, or
Let's go dysprosium. Dysprosium are in magnets in high temperature environments. Like the phone gets very warm and very hot, and it makes the phone vibrate.
So you're telling me that even though it seems that we all have those gadgets now, that the demand is uncertain. Like if I'm going now to mine for this mineral, I'm not even sure about the demand in like 3, 5, 10 years from now.
But they can change. If you look at how much dysprosium is in your phone, it, you know, yeah.
Tiny, tiny
So
amount.
yeah,
Yes.
you pour a couple grains of salt. So it's there. These materials are used in very small quantities.
Yeah.
Thin film technologies, you can't even see, they're the materials aren't used in tremendous amounts, which makes a new technology coming on can shift. If battery technologies shift, the amount of manganese or the amount of nickel in a battery can vary drastically. So now nickel is a much bigger market than say tellurium or selenium or dysprosium. So I think that because these markets aren't liquid, and because when you get LNG out of the ground, it's in really, I don't know, one form, and you sell that form. But the dysprosium, it's got many different end uses, and so therefore you have to be able to create a product that can fit each one of those end uses. And that also adds to the challenge of ensuring that you have processing.
Very interesting. Are we running out of like zinc, copper, or any other minerals that are widely used?
Yeah, we are. The good resources have been found. The ones that are easier to mine. So ore grades, the percentage of ore in the ground that we're trying to mine is dropping. So we have found the easy stuff. But just like the shale revolution in the US, there are new technologies that bring on new types of resources that were difficult to find before. But with that said, it's becoming more expensive to get those resources out. And so, on one hand, yes, we're running out of those resources. But I don't think that's the main challenge at the moment, that we've hit the ground, we've hit the end of neodymium. We've just haven't been able to unlock resources that are economic.
Space is definitely not being going to be economic, but there is a lot of minerals in the space.
There's a lot of minerals in the space, and there's a lot of minerals on the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
And but you have a cost issue, and then you have a processing issue,
and an environmental issue, I guess.
and you have environmental issues. Yes.
Yeah. Good. So let's move to your personal trajectory, David.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit how you got into minerals. And I mean, you seem very passionate about it. It's like a fascinating topic. And again, you were very prescient and you were on top of it like way before anybody else. And I like actually a lot the way the approach you had in your book, which was a little bit like being a reporter and going to different countries, interviewing different CEOs, companies, going to conferences, and basically, having all those different kind of perspectives from the government, from the industry, from the academia, different, jurisdictions. So tell us a little bit how you found yourself in this domain.
I worked I've had an interest in international affairs. I was in Peace Corps. I went to Tufts University's International Affairs School, and right after
We went to
school,
the same school, by the way.
there we go. Yes, we did. And we and after graduating, I went to work in the U.S. government at the Office of Management and Budget, and I was looking over the Office of Surface Mining and the Minerals Management Service, so looking at mining and resources offshore. I figured that resources were inherently international, and understanding how the resource markets work, at least from the government and regulatory perspective, would be interesting.
So this in the White House was like around 2023, 2020, like early
2000,
2000.
2003, 2007.
Yeah. So
So
was there already discussion at the White House, like high level, about rare earth minerals and critical minerals, or not yet?
it was Cheney's energy policy, Bush's
Mm.
energy policy, which was
Yeah.
really focused on oil and gas
Yeah.
and Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and that was
Yeah.
a lot of the focus. So there, I wasn't in the area of critical minerals,
Yeah.
and from my knowledge in 2010, looking back, there was not a focus in critical
Right.
minerals.
Right. Mhm.
But I left the U.S. government, went to Lehman Brothers, and I was looking at international investments at
Just
Lehman
before the
Brothers
financial crisis.
before the financial crisis, because Lehman was concerned about the risk because they were a U.S. bank and they were mostly focusing on U.S., but they were going to start to go into Turkey and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan,
Mm.
and that most of those investments were either in the tech space or in the telecom space and natural resources. So I was looking again at investment into natural resources while I was at Lehman. When that fell, I ended up at an energy trading firm. So I was seeing how commodities move. And
Yeah.
then in 2010, I took a fellowship at the Council on Foreign Relations at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan. And that's when China had cut off access to rare earths to
Yeah.
Japan. And I had kind of this ringside seat working in their ministry as to what was happening. And I had worked in government, I had worked in commodities trading, and I thought I had a background in a number of different areas to understand these resources.
Yeah.
So I was looking to write a little bit more, and I decided to focus on these critical minerals. And
Yeah.
we just saw from 2010 that society was going in a certain way, that these resources would become more dear. And so a lot of the kind of arguments that people take, take as kind of the foundation of critical minerals were stuff that I had to kind of learn on my own,
Mm-hmm.
because there weren't there were books. The last one I think was written in 1978, and then there were books about minerals, but that was back in the days where most of the products that we use only use 10, 15, 20 resources. Now,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, half the elements known to man are in one.
Yeah.
So things have changed when they were writing those books, because of the different nature of the high-tech goods of today. So
Yeah.
it was spending about 2-3 years trying to put together what was the challenge. And it
Mm-hmm.
looks obvious when you look in hindsight, but when you're
Yeah.
putting the piece together, it's not as clear.
Yeah. No, really, congratulations, because it's very well written. It's witty. It's very insightful, and for somebody who is not an expert in minerals, like, I learned a lot.
You're very generous.
Um,
Thank you.
yes, yeah. So I'm curious, because you wrote this very good, excellent book, and then you went into an entrepreneurial journey, which had nothing to do with minerals, more into
Yeah.
the hospitality travel
Right.
business. So, how do you combine those two journeys?
Well, it was at 20. It was between when my book came out, when my book was written and when it came out was about 9 months, and I was working on a side project in Bali where I had done some of the writing for my book, to open up a space for people who were working remotely. We saw a trend back in 2015, 2016, that
Again,
increasingly
very
people were
visionary, before COVID, before everything. So
before
that
COVID, yeah, exactly. We saw that trend, and so I started to do two things: one, continuing the research, the work on critical minerals, and then focusing on remote work, which became, we raised a little bit of capital, and when you have investors, you want to make sure that you're spending the appropriate time on the work that they've invested and trusted you in. So there was
yeah.
more focus, much more focus then. But there, back in 2018, there weren't that many people focusing on critical minerals. So much so that I was called to testify 3 or 4 times when I was in Indonesia, in front of the U.S. Congress, because there weren't that many people. And now
Yeah.
there
Everybody became an expert on minerals suddenly.
everyone became an expert.
But you're the
Um,
original one.
but it's the real challenge is that you you got to spend the time to understand what's happening. It's one thing to be able to know the story, but people talk about different aspects of stockpiling or mining. But if you don't understand the geology, or if you don't understand how to get those questions, the solutions that you're providing may get 80% right, but it's that 20% wrong that is really going to screw up your advice. And so there is a lot of advice out there, and that's really misguided. I've not seen so much. There's been so much opportunity for learning, but it's not producing better papers. It's not producing better advice. It's just producing more noise.
So,
And
are you ready to?
I hesitate to be that expert. I look around and I speak to other people who I feel are experts. But the truth is, I think there's no one who's a true expert in all of the aspects of this materials. But you do have to be humble enough to realize, just like we need to rely on our allies to provide resources, that we need to rely on other experts to understand how we can put policy together. And those experts aren't always sitting in a company, and those experts aren't always sitting in academia, and they're rarely sitting in government. But it's about putting all of those people together.
Yeah. So, do you feel you're ready to spend more time on minerals these days? Because we need your expertise for sure.
Well, I am spending more time on it. The first piece I wrote in about 8 years was the other
I
day.
saw that. Yeah.
I thought it was about time, and so I am. It's a question of, personally, where do I want to go, and what do I want to do? But I'm enjoying the process right now and speaking to so many more people within the space, and there are a lot more smart people in the space, which is good. So although I mentioned that there are a lot of people who are just kind of reading the script, there
Yeah.
are also people pushing the script.
Yeah.
So that's good too.
So, do you feel it was like a lost decade, like between the time you wrote your book and warned everybody to now, where now it's really a priority?
I thought when I wrote the book, I thought there was going to be increasing interest in 2018, 2019. I was wrong. It
Why
was
that
probably
time
about
frame?
three,
Why that?
because of demand. I saw that at a certain point, demand was going to be um, more dear at around that time. That that people would start to understand the supply lines. And 2018 was still quiet, but that's when people who were getting into the space now, who got into the space then, became very successful, because that's kind of when the tide started lifting. So I thought at that point there would already be enough attention, but 2017, 2018 was still kind of crickets. But I think that's when the smart people, I know like Robbie Diamond from Safe started to get in to that at around that time. I know there's a Minviro, um, a life cycle analysis company started about that time. Simon Moores and Benchmark had been around since 2014, but they really started to hit their stride in 2018. That's when the rising tide really started.
Mm. Okay. Well, I'll keep following you, and thank you for joining the podcast, David.
Thank you very much, Leslie. I appreciate it. And thank you for the generous words about the book.
This episode was recorded on May 8, 2025. This is Leslie Palti-Guzman saying good day and good luck.